I know that traditionally people prefer to read short books towards the end of the year when you're in that like mad rush to try and meet your reading goal and you have limited time. But personally, I quite like starting off the year with short books, especially if like one of your main goals of the year is to like get back into reading or to read more. Short books really provide you with that like adrenaline, the feeling of achievement. Once you've got through it, you're like, wow, I feel driven to carry on and to read more. So that's why I thought I would make a video today talking about short books, not necessarily all short, but books that you can read in a day. The longer ones on this list are very repulsive. No, not repulsive, the opposite, propulsive. And once you start reading it, I'm sure you won't be able to put it down. These are all books that I myself read in one sitting or a day or across 2 days, but I would have been able to read in a day had I had the time. It's more just about like, you know, other things in life going on that meant that I couldn't sit and read for 24 hours. I've had a haircut. My hair's really short, still adjusting to it, so if I touch it throughout this video, I do apologise, but I did diffuse it today, so I'm hoping it looks okay. Maybe I'll watch this back and hate it during the editing, but I'm trying not to concentrate on what I look like, because what I have to say is more important. I will say that a lot of these books I read a long time ago, so I'm not sure how much I remember, but I don't want to spoil too much, so I'm not really going to be giving summaries. It's more just going to be like the feel of the book or the themes that it explores, and if that seems intriguing to you, you can yourself look into the plot. I like to go into a book knowing as little as possible, because then I find myself surprised or intrigued when I start reading. The first book on my list of short books is The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly by Hwang. Just realised I don't actually have the translator here, because that's the thing with translated fiction. They never put the translator on the cover. And as someone who's studied translation a little bit at university, the work that goes into like translation is just as important as the writer. The translator in themselves is almost writing a new book based on the original. So I feel like they just don't get enough recognition. We need those names on the cover. The translator is Kim. I'm fairly sure this is, yes, South Korean. This is, I would say, middle grade, and don't let that put you off, because I personally am not one for middle grade. I'm not really fantasy, a children's book kind of gal. I prefer mature themes, but I feel like this is just quite a wholesome read, and also like the themes explored within it are quite mature, and you can still draw a lot from it, even though it's seemingly this fairy tale about, you know, chickens on a farm. It's a heartwarming and quite poignant, I really want to say this word but I just can't say it. It's a heartwarming and really poignant story about a hen called Sprout who is desperate to escape the captivity that she's in on this farm. She wants to raise a family of her own, but I'm pretty sure she can't lay eggs. You follow her on this journey. This novella explores themes of freedom, motherhood, and finding personal fulfillment. This is really interestingly explored through the life of a chicken whose seeming purpose is to lay eggs, but this chicken doesn't lay eggs. You follow her on this journey trying to find some other kind of purpose outside of what society expects of her, and I think that's quite a cool what's it called? Allegory for real life, and I think that's quite a cool metaphor for real life. The story also explores the balance between hope and reality, what you can imagine for yourself and how you bring that into fruition. It's quite a gentle and reflective tale about making choices and finding your own path for yourself, resilience in the face of hardships. I'm trying to stop saying like, because it annoys me so much when I watch back footage of me and I'm just going like. One thing I loved about this book is how comforting it is, and its approach to really hard themes like mortality that can make one feel quite existential, but it's a very comforting approach. There's an emphasis on the cyclical nature of life and like the natural progression that life takes and how life can come from death. There's a big emphasis on like the natural order and like the natural cycle of life, and that was something I really enjoyed in this novella. Next book I want to talk about is Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. This is up there with one of my favourite books ever. I read this in 2023, I believe, so quite a while ago now, but still I think about this book so often. I think I lent it to a friend. I wish I had it with me, but it's back home in England and I'm in China. I remember when I read this was just around the time when I just started like annotating books. And when I say annotating, I would fold over the page with the quote that I like and then go back through with a pencil and just underline quotes and write anything that comes to mind. It wasn't like, I'm going to sit here and study. I wish I could show you the physical copy I had, because I'd read like 50 pages and almost every page was folded over because there's some beautiful lines. This novella follows a black man living in London as he grapples with his own masculine identity, especially in relation to showing vulnerability and emotions and longing within his relationship. Although this novella wasn't relatable to me specifically in the way that it's about a black man living in London, there were a lot of aspects of this that really drew me towards it. It captures the arc of how men often suppress their emotions or push people away during periods of grief or sadness in a way that I found so intriguing, especially since this was written by a man himself. This is a response to grief and sadness that I've seen in men around me. I found it really interesting to see inside the brain of this character. Another thing that really drew me in was the lyrical and introspective prose that I just adored, and I think this novella captures the feeling of falling in love so accurately. I'm pretty sure I read this when I was like pining over someone. There were just so many lines that I felt expressed how I felt so well. I think that's why I was like underlining every line of just like the miscommunication between people, and the feeling of longing and pining over someone was something that really resonated with me at that time. If you've ever like been in love, or you've ever pined over someone, you've ever been longing for someone, and you read this novel, I'm really sure that it will resonate with you too. It was also really interesting to read just how like trauma and oppression impacts one's own sense of identity, because this black man is obviously juggling his own personal desires with society's expectations of him based on his gender and his class and his race. This novella is also littered with like pop culture references. This really solidified the sense of time and place, and it also provided a kind of soundtrack to the novella that I really enjoyed. It just sparks a whole another level of interest for me. Like I can go away after reading it and listen to the tracks mentioned and keep thinking about the themes of the novel. For example, I remember when I read My Dark Vanessa, it mentioned Fiona Apple several times. She's a big player in that novel, and at the time I read it and I was like, Fiona Apple, I know that name. And I went away and I listened to a few tracks and I was like, oh yeah, I haven't listened to her in ages. She's someone that I think I listened to Paper Bag several times when I was younger. She never stuck around for me for some reason, and now after reading My Dark Vanessa quite a while ago now, but it re-invoked this obsession. And I love it when art draws me in and shows me other art, and it just feels like a really rounded experience. It's like a stepping stone into further exploration of other art, and I love reading about other people's appreciation of art within art. Unless you've been living under a rock, I'm sure you've already heard of it, and that is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. You may have seen the film, which I didn't like, mainly because why do they keep casting Emma Watson to do American accents? I love her, but she cannot do an American accent, and it really takes me out of the film when I'm watching someone trying to do an accent that they can't do. Anyway, or you know the quote that's, how does it go? We accept the love we think we deserve. That's from this novel. This is a coming of age novella, and it's a very interesting format in that it's told through letters to an unnamed character. The writer of these letters is our central protagonist. He's called Charlie. He is introspective, rather sensitive, and also quite mentally ill, and we follow him as he navigates being in high school, and he makes these like unlikely group of friends that kind of take him in. I will say they're a little bit patronizing at times. He's kind of, what's that word? Everyone around him kind of treats him like, not like a child, but there's like an air to it of that. He's quite infantilized throughout. I remember I read this in 2022? Three? I think. I read this on a plane. It was like a 2-hour plane to Dubrovnik or something, and I spent the whole journey reading, and then in the queue through to security when we got off the plane I was still reading, and I managed to finish it all in one sitting because it was so propulsive and I just wanted to know what happened, much to the annoyance of my two friends who were like, hello, we want to talk to you, we're on holiday, and I was like, no, I have to finish this book. One thing I loved about this novella is how it explores trauma, how trauma travels across multiple generations and manifests itself differently in different people based on their own experiences and the generation that they're living in. I would check the trigger warnings because this novel centres on a lot of traumatic events, although I will say that I think they're dealt with very deftly. I really enjoy how this novel focuses on the reactions and the responses to these traumatic events rather than like the graphic details of the events themselves. Sometimes I feel like novels with really traumatic events kind of not glorify them, but I don't know, they're there for shock factor, and I don't always appreciate that. I think it can kind of cheapen a work in a way. It's like a way to draw readers in because they're just intrigued, you know, like the whole when there's a car crash on a motorway and people slow down because they want to know what's going on, that kind of thing. This novel doesn't fixate on the graphic events themselves. There is a lot of literary references throughout as Charlie is kind of building this relationship with his English teacher, and that's something as I said before, I love. I was adding them to my want to read as I went along. They were all kind of like classics or like modern classics because this book was written in the 90s, I believe. We actually did this at book club at university. Me and a few friends were on the committee for book club, and I chose this one because I knew it was short and it's accessible to a wider audience. I think it held up on the reread until I went to book club, and then speaking to two of the girls that would go every week, and I quite respect their opinions, and they were both like, oh, we didn't really like it. And I was like, oh, that's strange. Most people I speak to love this book. I thought you two would really like it. And they were like, oh, well, all of the literary references were like male writers, and they also felt that the way that the female character is portrayed is a little bit off. And I'm not sure how to explain this. It's very like manic pixie dream girl, and sometimes she seems to appear only as like an object of sexual desire, and when people express attraction towards her, she kind of just seems to go along with it. On reflection, when they told me that, I kind of tainted my view of the book, but I still think it's a good book. I still enjoyed it. Hopefully that hasn't put you off. Just an interesting little critique I thought I'd include, because I like to form rounded opinions of books, and I can still hold negative opinions of books that I like, if that makes sense. I'm not saying this book is bad because of this, you know? Every piece of art is a result of multiple viewpoints. I don't think I can be one to say whether a book is good or bad. It's all subjective, you know? The next book is Tin Man by Sarah Winman. Sarah Winman is one of my favourite authors. I just adore the way she writes. Very understated, but yet lyrical. I don't have the physical copy of these books with me, but there is a quote that I found on Goodreads that I really think demonstrates why I love this novel. There's something about first love, isn't there? She said. It's untouchable to those who played no part in it, but it's the measure of all that follows. This demonstrates really well why this book resonated with me so much. I think that's a universal experience of, you know, your first love as being something that you hold the rest of your loves up to in your mind as you grow older. Even if you've moved on from this first love, I feel like a lot of the time you kind of subconsciously are comparing your feelings towards this person to the feelings you felt towards your first love, or their behaviours, or just the nature of your relationship. For me anyway, I feel like I do that a lot. I'm always weighing up how I feel about people compared to how I felt about people in the past. It explores the relationship between Ellis and Michael, who become friends very early on, a young love trope. As someone who had most of her serious relationships while she was a teenager, I think it's another reason why it resonated with me. That fierce passion and confusion also of young love. The novella weaves between timelines and between perspectives of Ellis and Michael. As another features of novels that I love is multiple timelines and different perspectives, so you can get kind of a more rounded view of a situation, and also it allows information to be trickled down to the reader, which is another thing I love. This is one of my favourite approaches to a narrative, especially in this love story where you get to see the miscommunication between two characters as you see inside both characters' heads, and you see how their lack of communication impacts the way their relationship is formed, but also you see how their perspective of each other informs their behaviours. It's kind of like the normal people effect. This novella explores romantic and platonic love, something that I love. I'm not really big into romance, but this blurring between platonic and romantic is something that I love to see explored, and in this case the blurring of romantic and platonic love is explored in a more interesting way because there's also this other factor of internalized homophobia and how that impacts how they view these two characters view each other. Very typical of Winman's prose. If you read this and you enjoy it, I would really recommend reading her other works. I've read all of them and they all hold up. They're all very introspective and reflective. I grew very attached to these two characters, and this novel is devastating but in a very quiet way. Next up, we've got A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This is middle grade again, but please don't let that put you off. I think this explores very mature themes, and you can really get something out of it reading it as a fully fledged grown adult. It seems long, but it's so easy to get through. I'm pretty sure I read this in one sitting. It's very propulsive and also just very intriguing. It follows a little boy who is visited by a monster when his mother is sadly dying, and the monster says over 3 nights he's going to come and tell him stories, and at the end the little boy has to tell the monster a story. I could be wrong with that, but pretty sure that's the premise. I don't want to give too much away because it's quite short, and the less you know, the better. There is a blend of fantasy and reality as we're dealing with very difficult themes like grief and parental loss. There's also the fantastic element of this monster. This book is really about confronting your fears and confronting reality, allowing yourself to experience grief and sadness. It's also about coming to terms with acknowledging your own feelings, even when they are bad or sad. It also explores the healing that can come from accepting the truth of your reality. This is especially interesting in regards to how it explores these feelings in a little boy. As I talked about with Open Water, I feel like a lot of the time men are expected to bottle things up or to ignore these feelings that make you vulnerable or emotional and to suppress them, and it's also very sad, so be prepared. I'm pretty sure I shed a tear or two reading this. My penultimate recommendation is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is, again, one of my top favourite books of all time. It's a little bit longer, but for me anyway, it was incredibly propulsive, and I just wanted to know what was going to happen. It's very intriguing, and it's written in a way where the reader is left not in the know. You want to find out what's going on, and that drives you to finish the book as soon as possible. It did for me anyway. This switches perspectives and timelines, maybe another reason why I love it, between Miri, who is grappling with the return of her wife Leah from a submarine mission that's gone wrong. It also switches between Leah's perspective, and she's telling what happened on the submarine. She's like a marine biologist. She's going down into the ocean to observe something. We're not really given too much information about what. There's definitely like a fantastical, supernatural element. It's very subtle. It's more just unsettling and disturbing rather than outright horror. But it uses this theme to explore love, loss and grief, and dealing with the death of a relationship, kind of dealing with the death of the image you hold of someone in your head, and how experiences can change that person and you're kind of left grieving the person you thought you knew. This is very atmospheric, eerie and unsettling. I was on the edge of my seat throughout. There's this metaphor of like the sea as vast and an unknowable force, and it mimics the distance that grows between these two characters, and I just thought it was done so well. There's a lot of sea lore in it, which I'm sure will be interesting to a lot of people, and I really liked how that was incorporated. I will give no spoilers to the ending, except to say that other people I've spoken to about it didn't like the ending. I loved it. I thought it was perfect for the novel. The last book to get you out of a reading slump is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I talked about this in my favourite books of 2024, so I actually have no notes on this, so I'm just gonna freestyle, and it probably means I'm gonna talk shit. The reason I put this on this list, it's a bit long, but for me it was just so propulsive. I had to know what was going to happen. This follows Irina, who is a photographer. She's like an artist, and she takes pictures of men in compromising sexual scenarios. It's definitely quite dark. We're following a narcissistic character, and I think that's why it made it so propulsive to me. I was just so intrigued by her narrative and the way she looked at things, the way she looked at the world. For me, was very intriguing, and that's what drew me into the story. I was unable to put this down, and I was reading this at a time where I needed to put it down because I was supposed to be writing my dissertation, and instead I was sat in the library reading this book. This is a book that I think is just so accessible. I think most people will, even if you don't enjoy it, you still want to know what's going on, so you'll get through it very quickly. Good for breaking a reading slump. So that is all my book recommendations. I'll just add on the end here, if you're looking for short books, go for Claire Keegan. She is also a great writer of novellas, but I'm not going to talk about her because I feel like I talk about her all the time. Anyway, thank you for watching. Let me know your best short books or books that got you out of a reading slump in the comments so that I can use them next time I'm in a reading slump. Thanks for watching. See you later. See you later sounds so weird. Bye. It's just so blunt. I don't know how to end it. Bye. god, that just... I don't know what to say.